Next, from Springfield, a panel of school district superintendents discuss funding Illinois education and the need for education funding reform. This runs about 45 minutes.
My name is Mike Gouch. I'm the superintendent at Harrisburg Unit 3 schools. I would like to thank you for allowing us to be here today to advocate for our children and to ask for a more equitable funding system to be adopted by the state. We need something done as quick as possible, and now is that time. We appreciate you listening to us, and with that, I'd like to pass it on to my esteemed colleague from East Moline, Kristen Humphreys.
Good morning. My name is Kristen Humphreys. I am the superintendent for the East Moline School District. We are located in the Quad Cities, and you do have my numbers in front of you, and you see what's going on with our financial situation in East Moline. But our story is more than just what's on the piece of paper. The piece of paper does give you a snapshot of what's going on, but we've heard stories. I've attended all of these hearings, and we've heard stories of school districts and the different cuts they've had to make and the struggles they're having. In East Moline, there's nothing else to cut. Our classrooms are full. We have kindergartens right now at 29 and 28. We have interventions we need to put in place for our students, but we can't hire the individuals to do so. We've cut $1.2 million from our Ed Fund budget in the last 2 years. Obviously, that had to be done, and our Board of Education struggles with it because they see it's needed for our kids. Right now, 21% of our population are second language learners. 110 students out of the 2,800 in our district are students that are newcomers to our country. We have 36 languages in East Moline right now, and we're an elementary district. We have a classroom, a kindergarten classroom, where nobody in the classroom speaks English and nobody in the classroom speaks Spanish. These are the realities of East Moline, and we love these students coming to our district. We believe they make us richer and they make us a much better place to be. But we need to have the services to offer them. Right now, we're at 78% free and reduced as far as the National School Lunch Program was the last year we took those numbers. And that tells a story as well of where we are, where our community's at financially. Our students need help. 21% of our students move throughout the year. So we are at 21% mobility. So what that means is a teacher that sits down with a class of 25, 5 of those students will be gone at some point in the year, and 5 new students will be there. It's very difficult on those students without the proper, appropriate interventions in place to catch up to where they need to be. We are no longer buying textbooks. We've been saving money for a few years. We are working hard this year to do an English language arts textbook adoption for our elementary students, and we hope to do that later this year with our Board of Education. But we need change to the funding formula, and dollars have to follow kids, no matter where you live. And you can see from our numbers here that East Moline is dependent on general state aid. 41% of our money does come from the state of Illinois. And I believe very strongly that our teachers are doing the best they can. They're working their tails off. They want help. They need help. Our community is begging for help. And our teachers need those supports. They need those individuals. We talk about interventions. MTSS or RTI is what it was formerly called. Putting things in place, it's hard without adults. It's hard to do that without people. And right now, we can't afford to bring those people into our district. I'm joined here today with some individuals from Sandoval. They've been struggling with, my colleagues from Sandoval, they've been struggling with issues in their own school district, but just recently they had to decide whether or not to get a boiler, or they had to get a boiler, and unfortunately they had to let go of teachers because they couldn't afford both in that next fiscal year. They had to decide between heat and educating kids, and that should never happen in the United States, but it certainly should never happen in the state of Illinois. I'd like to pass it to my colleague from Granite City.
Thank you.
Good morning. Thank you for the opportunity. I'm Jim Greenwald, Superintendent of the Schools in Granite City Community Unit 9. We have 6,300 students in 54 square miles. We're located in southwestern Illinois in Madison County. My numbers speak for themselves. Ones that I would like to highlight: we have over 1,300 students in my district 114 students English as a second language, and 64% poverty level. I'd like to emphasize, over the past 5 years since FY12, general state aid has lost due to proration in my district of $9.5 million. My board has courageously made millions of dollars of cuts the last 5 years and can't continue to do so. We have a great vocational program, second to none, especially being a blue-collar community. We have cut vocational drafting, we have cut vocational pattern shop, fortunately still maintain some good programs. But we cannot continue to maintain, sustain, and improve our school district without some help. 1 year ago, in April, we lost a valiant effort in a tax referendum. We gave presentations. I alone gave 225 within the community. And we lost that referendum with over 6,000 votes by 422. My board opted not to go back to the voting public. So we have tightened the belt and we made transparent cuts as we possibly can. I'd also like to emphasize that we would not have a negative fund balance if not for selling working cash bonds. That was based upon the tax referendum not passing. Also, 1 mile to my south is East St. Louis, and I communicate with Superintendent Dr. Arthur Culver on a regular basis. As a matter of fact, we had a very successful press conference at Granite City High School just 2 weeks ago. East St. Louis shares the same sentiments as we do, actually in more distress. There are people here from East St. Louis. The plight is worse than Granite City's. In 2014, residents of East St. Louis were taxing themselves 9.02%, which was 211.2% of the state average. Now the situation in East St. Louis is even worse. East St. Louis residents are taxing themselves at 10.838. We are asking you for some help. Only the zip codes and the names have been changed. I'd like to turn the presentation over to Superintendent Mary Havis from South.
Good morning. Thank you so much for giving me the opportunity to share a little bit about the Berwyn South story with you this morning. We are a district of 4,100 students, 2 square miles just outside Chicago. We have a low-income population of 78%, and about 1,000 of our students are English language learners. You can see the numbers there in front of you that tell a story of the losses to our state aid over the past several years. We've been continuing to work on a deficit budget for the past several years in order to continue to provide our students with the very best programs. Our students begin school several years behind their peers. We need to spend a great deal of time catching them up. With the staffing that we have in our district right now, the number of students that need interventions are not receiving them. A third of students who qualify for intervention for reading, because they're behind in their reading skills, we are unable to staff our buildings to allow for that intervention to take place for a third of our students. So we're leaving 1 in 3 behind. We are at a point in our district now, we've been dipping into our savings, and we're to a point now that we are beginning cost-cutting conversations. 2 years ago, we did go out for referendum in our community to help with not only the low salaries we have for our teachers, the frequent turnover of our teachers, which is very difficult in our community, but also our significantly aging buildings. Unfortunately, that referendum did not pass, so at this time we are engaging in cost-cutting meetings with our community. We have had discussions about closing schools and significantly cutting programs that will be devastating to our children. We plan at this point to go for another referendum next year, go for a more modest increase in our taxes that can be affordable to our community. But we are at a point that we need help. We cannot continue to educate our students at this level. Again, I'll just say again that we're leaving 1 in 3 behind because we can't provide the interventions for our students. You hear similar stories from all of us, and I know that districts in the Chicago area are having similar conversations about the possibilities of closing school and cutting programs that we know will be devastating for our children. I'd like to turn it over to Dr. David Lett.
Chairman Curry, members of the task force, I want to thank you for the opportunity to speak today. I come today representing really Christian County and Pana Community Unit School District number 8 in Christian County. And I can tell you that you heard the stories here today about how proration really has devastated downstate. I can remember 6 years ago having a conversation with our representative. Did he realize that Governor Ryan's flat funding was truly not flat funding in the first year of 95% proration? And I said that's the beginning of the end for downstate districts as it relates to being dependent upon general state aid. As you see from my chart, we're very dependent upon state resource. We have limited property wealth, and as a result, we're in need of the formula to make up that difference. The other problem that has happened to our district and to me as its superintendent for the past 15 years is that in Illinois, the reason we need to be looking in earnest at a broken formula is because of the changing demographics in this state. When I came to Pana 15 years ago as its superintendent, we had 25% poverty in Pana. Today, as you can see by the chart, we're at 64% in 15 years. The formula's broken. We need to wait for poverty greater in this state because those kids deserve a equitable and reasonable education as it relates to their peers. And that's what we're here today representing. I have a contingent. We're the orange shirts out there in the audience. So we're rocking the orange today. But I have friends from Taylorville, which is the county seat in Christian County, in the purple. And I have 2 fellow superintendents from Christian County, Dr. Furstenau, Greg Furstenau from Taylorville, and Gary DePatis from Morrisonville. And we all have the same plight. In Taylorville, they've had to reduce their staff in Dr. Furstenau's tenure 30%. That's their entire staff, 30%. They've had to close one building specifically due to proration. He's also closed 2 other buildings during his tenure in Taylorville. In Pana, we have reduced our supplies 30%, our administrative staff 25%, our teaching staff 20%, and our support staff 15%. So one of the things that I get offended by, or you know, and I've been to all 4 of the, or this is the 5th task force committee meeting, is that somehow this has been mismanagement on the part of districts like ours with regard to why we're in the position that we're in. I can tell you that had we simply got the dollars that we were expectant to get without proration, we would have been running balanced budgets in Pana. This is directly due to proration. But the problem is, and I'm going to pass this chart out, this chart indicates the problem with fully funding this coming year the existing formula. Representative Bourne has seen this chart, but many of you haven't, so I'm going to let her pass this out. What you can see by this chart is that with the governor's plan to fully fund, and we commend the governor. We think the governor is right on target with making education a priority. But the problem with driving $55 million, it may be more than that if you've done any analysis with regard to the personal property replacement tax factor and the fact that there's the payback of that. Well, that gets made up for in the formula, so it's really more than $55 million in terms of the governor's proposal, but that's probably a debate for another day. But the reality is, you can see by this chart where the money's driven with a broken formula. And if you look at that closely, you can see that it's driven to places, and I'm not saying that don't need it, but need it less than places like our districts represented today. And it's important, I think, that we take a long, serious look with the House on the issue of a broken formula. And we obviously, in PANA and in the coalition, support Senate Bill 231 and have been supporters of Senator Menard, who is my senator, along with Representative Bourne. And we've supported his initiative from day one because, to be honest with you, 4 years ago, he was a part of hearing our plight in the first 2 years of proration, what was happening to our districts in terms of having met with a group of superintendents from his region. And he really took the ball and ran with it as it relates to school funding reform. So that being said, we thank you for listening to our stories. We're prepared to answer questions today, and really do appreciate you having taken up this issue, Speaker Madigan and Chairman Curry. We do appreciate it.
Thank you all for your testimony, efficient and I would say effective. We have add please Representatives McCasey and Wheeler to the roll call, and now we're ready for questions for your panel from this panel, starting with Representative Wehrle.
Thank you, Leader Curry. First off, I agree that we need to redo the formula. The current formula, at the very least, needs to be updated. So I'm with you in that regard. My first question is for the two superintendents that tried referendums and failed. And here you are asking the rest of the state to add money to your coffers. As a parent, not in your district, why is it on us to fund the education of students in your district when their own parents wouldn't step up and fund their education to a higher level?
I think you bring up a key point, and I look at this problem being universally an Illinois problem, not just a local problem, and I fully understand your sentiment, sir. Our people basically said, we can't have taxes raised, and I'm not a person that makes excuses, but I will say that 1 week before that April 7th election date, Granite City Steel, our largest industry, made an announcement that they were going to idle for 6 months. Again, too, not something that our community wanted to hear. So again, too, I fully understand your sentiments. As Dr. Lett mentioned, I think we need to universally look at this from Chicago to Cairo and everywhere in between.
Okay, and now specifically to Christian County, one of the advantages of being on this commission is I've started to really look at the tax rates and things around the state, and there's great disparity. And from school district to school district, there's even greater disparity. With inside Christian County, you go from Pana to Taylorville, and the EAVs are different, but yet Pana is taxing at a higher rate, trying to put some local skin in the game to a higher extent than Taylorville is. But then I look at the countywide tax structure and see that, generally speaking, 60% of everybody's real estate property taxes are going to fund units of government outside of education, where everywhere else in the state, that seems to be the inverse, that a majority of the property tax burden goes to fund education, and other units of government are a smaller comparison. What's going on in Christian County that has other taxing bodies being a bulk of the property tax?
Well, to be honest with you, Representative Wehrle, I think that's pretty typical of downstate counties as it relates to other, systems of government that you allude to, local systems of government. So I don't think that's atypical of downstate counties. But I can tell you that, in Pana, as you have alluded to, we are in the top 10% in our region. Stretching even beyond Christian County with regard to taxing ourselves. In addition to our rate, which is right at the state average, we have successfully in Christian County, and Taylorville was the leader in this, and we followed suit. We're successful in passing a 1-cent sales tax in Christian County. We also did it. A third of our populace is in Shelby County, so we stepped up and did that too in Shelby County. And in almost 20 years ago, not quite, our community 18 years ago stepped up in the midst of a tragedy with one of our buildings being burnt in terms of a fire, built a new high school, again, local tax support in terms of a referendum. So 3 times, in terms of my tenure, our community has stepped up. In terms of the issue in Taylorville, I can tell you that they are headed towards another tax referendum or trying to get their rate up. And I know that they're working very diligently on that because they did announce another $500,000 worth of cuts this winter with regard to this current coming fiscal year. So I do think they're prepared to step up and trying to step up as well in Taylorville, the county seat.
Thank you.
Please add Representatives Davis and Pritchard to the roll call. Representative Crespo.
Thank you, Leader. East Moline, I think you say your mobility rate is 21%.
Yes, sir.
Why is it so high?
We have a very mobile population based on jobs and individuals that move in with other families in temporary housing until they can find employment and move elsewhere.
Has it been pretty steady, 21% the last several years, or?
Yes, I used to be the principal of a school. I've been superintendent for 6 years, and I used to be the principal of a school in the district. And 1 year, as principal, our mobility rate in that school was at 40%. It was the highest in Rock Island County at that time. So we have a lot of apartments in that school area as well, where a lot of our families do move in and out on a regular basis. And our job, as you know, is we try and do everything we can while they're entrusted to our care.
Okay. I just want to touch on those referendums. I think I heard there's 2 school districts that recently had referendums, and we passed one out in Schaumburg and Hoffman several years ago. It's not easy to pass. Can you tell us how close was it? I mean, were you close to getting that 51%, or?
Lost by 422 votes. There were over 6,000 votes cast. And like I said, I really do feel that we put forth a valiant effort. We started giving presentations in November. I actually gave a presentation to people standing in line, sir, at 6:45 before the polls closed. And, you know, when we found out that we did not pass, and I fully realized that it was a huge burden, I realize 80% of them do not pass, but we put forth a good effort. Our board opted not to go for one this up-and-coming school year. Consequently, as you can see, those 3 buildings that have been closed, one was 2 years ago, 2 are for this up-and-coming school year, which will begin on August 17th. So we've tried to continue to make the cuts. The referendum was going to be 80 cents in the Ed Fund, and our emphasis was this is for technology, this is for textbooks, this isn't for new buildings, it's not for a new wrestling arena, which was the poster boy for the one that we did 8 years ago. And 2, we've tried to put forth a good effort, not saying that our board won't do one in the future, but we opted not to do another one for this up-and-coming school year.
So you fell short, you said 400 votes?
422, yes, sir.
Okay, so what percent did she get?
It was below, it was
Below.
very low percentage, probably 30-ish.
Okay.
Berwyn South, our referendum was defeated. We only had about 20 to 23% yes. It was a large 2 referendums on the ballot to look at buildings and Ed Fund, the limiting rate. We certainly recognized at the time that it was a big ask for our community, and they told us that was too much, and they simply couldn't afford to raise taxes to that extent. We are investigating and have committees working right now to run a referendum either in November or April with a more modest ask and specifically for education. At this point, our buildings we're working to maintain, and we'll wait on anything with the buildings at this point.
Thank you. Thank you, Leader.
Representative Chapellavia, but before you take it over, we'd like to add Representative Mayfield and welcome Representative Scher to the committee. Representative Chapellavia.
Thank you, Leader. This is a general question because this morning, you know, back in my district, we were hit with it's all the state's fault by the superintendent, and even the board members were saying shame on the legislators. They just want to be reelected. Okay. When we do that, when we place the blame on somebody else, three fingers come back at us. Okay. The question I have for you is in your districts, because the money's going to have to come from somewhere. We don't have a bank account here where we print money off everybody in the world. Please listen to that. And everybody wants their piece of the pie, but we don't have enough money. And we passed an income tax increase, mostly by the Democratic side in both chambers, and we let it sunset. That's $3 billion went bye-bye. What have you done to educate your constituency that there's going to have to be a fee increase somewhere? We have to fund not only education, so we have the best and the brightest, and we keep them in our state, and we get their tax dollars, and it comes back into the system. But what have you done to show leadership within your communities and with your board to understand that throwing people under the bus is not going to work any longer. What we have to do is say, citizens, we're in real dire straits, and you want more services for not raising any fees or any taxes. What are we supposed to do here in Springfield? So I'd be more than happy to go out to anybody's school district. I used to chair elementary and secondary ed, and I was the appropriation chair for elementary and secondary ed in my past tenure here in the General Assembly. And I'm getting really fed up with different entities throwing each other under the bus and really not sitting down at the table and saying, it's all our fault, and let's move forward. And where do we find the fees to increase the dollars into education for everybody? Because, you know, your picture is not very much different than a Chicago inner city school, which they don't have toilet paper, they do school inside of a closet room, and that's shameful. Okay, and I hurt when I see videos like yours, because we must come further as a society. But we have to realize that we have to pay higher taxes, or we have to pay fees on rental cars, or we have to pay for Botox, whatever it is, because our kids are worth it. And every year I've been here, we have cut education, and that's so unacceptable. So I feel your pain, but we're in this boat together, and throwing people out of the ship and trying to make your boat lighter is not helping anybody. And I want to commend Senator Menard, because I know he's been on the firing line. And a lot of people up here have been on the firing line to try to support you. But when one of my colleagues say, well, your parents don't even believe enough to have another property increase, well, it's ridiculous when we're relying on property value tax to go into the school system at 68%, 67%. We're taxing them out. So why aren't we making it smooth across the state, where we increase something where the weight is all across, we lift a little bit of property tax weight off, and educate full. And it might be rhetorical, but please listen to me. You know, it doesn't do us any good to blame us down here if we can't even get our citizens to agree on dollars to help us solve this issue, or so we're just going to chase our tail. And I'm here to help. I took a tax increase vote, okay? I took that hard vote. And sometimes leadership means taking the hard vote and not coming back here to Springfield. Doing your duty because the citizens don't understand the weight of what that push of that green button means for somebody else's life and their children's life. So,
Yeah, if one of you wants to respond, I thought it was a great statement, and I think it
Yeah,
was
I do
pretty
too.
much
I
rhetorical.
do want to say one thing. I've been honored to work with a great group of individuals that want change. And one of the things that we talk about is nobody says we want more. Of course we want more. That's like the child going to the grocery store with their parent that says, well, you have a check, just write a check. We know that there's no money in the bank account. What we're asking for is, and in our community, the conversation has been around changing the formula based on what we do have. Because when the pot does grow, it will grow. Illinois is going to turn around. When the pot does grow, everybody will benefit. But we're asking, and the conversation hasn't been to point fingers, but it's been to let's shift that conversation. And what I've been doing in our community, and I know my colleagues have been doing, is talking about how we can lift up all children. And I don't begrudge my colleagues that have been before you in other committees that come from districts that I would call affluent. That's their constituency. Those are their individuals, and they have a level of education that they want to see for their children, just like I want to see for ours. But our conversations have been around what can we do with the money we do have, and do it in a smarter way to support kids of poverty and kids that need those extra services. We all know this. I've been heartened, Representative Worley, he understands that, you understand that something has to change. You know, our EAV and our tax rate in East Moline, our EAV is dropping by $10 million over the last few years, and our tax rate we're higher than the average. So we are doing our part, but I do want you to know that amongst the individuals sitting up here, the conversation has been to focus on what we do have and trying to be smarter about it.
Thank you very much. Thank you all again for your testimony.
I just would like to add one more comment, too. I think Representative
If you could be pretty brief, we have two more panels to
Yes,
follow, so if you've got
absolutely.
something different to say, say it.
Absolutely. Representative Chapel-Lovia, I think you're correct. I think this is a group issue. This isn't laying the blame at the feet of the legislature. Who's been here sitting in front of you year after year asking for more? I mean, we understand. You guys have a very, very difficult task at hand. But one of the things with regard to the income tax, I just want to make one statement with regard to that. No one wants more, I don't want more of my income taken away for taxes. No one does. But the reality is for, services that we all want, desire, and value, whether it's the roads that we're coming in on with potholes or our kids who are our future, that takes dollars. And so we do have to prioritize and recognize. And I want to say one other thing with regard to the income tax. In my opinion, I think you guys were making inroads in terms of paying down your bills. I think the facts are there that we were bringing down the deficit with regard to Illinois. Now, was it fast enough? Was it enough? I don't know the answer to that. That's for you guys to ultimately make that decision. But services cost money. And so as a result, I think you guys all have hard decisions ahead of you.
Okay, a final question from Representative Pritchard.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Panel members, I'm sorry I was late to hear your presentation, so I'll just frame my question around one idea, that I know all of you are struggling to provide the best quality education you can with the dollars that you have. As I look at your report card, all of you are at about the 50% level of state support, some 41, but I mean, it's within the ballpark. So you're having good balance of state and local resources. How would you use different resources to meet the challenging needs that you have of your student populations?
One of the things that I would like to mention, I've got AP English classes in my high school right now, which is just shy of 1,900 kids, busting at the seams with 38 to 40 students. I really do feel that with the cuts we've made, with the schools we've closed, it would help with class sizes. You can also see the number of staff we've reduced, namely teachers. I really do feel that it would help provide some of the resources that we need that we have cut back on.
Representative Pritchard, we would use a two-pronged approach in East Moline schools. Since we've had a change in the Illinois learning standards, it takes time and it takes money. It takes individuals working together as committees to work on that curriculum, and it takes money to buy that curriculum. We would work on that side, and we would also bring in more adults to have specific interventions to work with kids that we need to raise up, because we know that a strong education lifts all of our communities up. So we would work on both of those things at the same time.
Representative, I want to talk about a creative thing that we did in Pana as it relates to, many of your districts up in your area are probably one-to-one computing type districts where they have that availability to their students. We want that too in Pana. And so we've creatively worked with our foundation and the district and also our parents to basically fund that. So a three-pronged approach. It's not solely utilizing district funds, which we could not afford to do. And I'm proud to say we're going to be next year 6 through 10, one-to-one. And that, like I said, that's a creative way that we've come up with in terms of a three-pronged approach to pay for that.
Thank you very much, all of you panelists. You've done an excellent job, and we do appreciate all you've said. So you are now dismissed, and we will move on to the second panel, which consists of a single person, Robert Wolf, who's the Chief Financial Officer for the State Board of Education.
Good morning. Again, my name is Robert Wolf. I'm the Chief Financial Officer at the Illinois State Board of Education. And hopefully at your place, I have this PowerPoint that I'm going to walk through briefly with you. I want to start off by giving a definition of what the mandated categoricals are. It's a cluster of state programs which are appropriated for a particular statutory purpose or population. In general, the funds are restricted to be used only for that purpose or population only. However, it's important to note that there is no statutory requirement on the part of any school district to provide accounting for the use of those funds after the fact. For the most part, the mandated categoricals are reimbursements for prior year expenditures for a particular school district. To put some perspective on the amounts that are dedicated to the mandated categoricals, and I also, in your schedule on page 3, I added the bilingual education reimbursements, not traditionally known as a mandated categorical reimbursement, but it does fit underneath that category for the purposes of this discussion. For FY16, there's $1.8 billion that's been appropriated for these particular line items. And when you compare that to the percentage of the total appropriations DSB for the major programs, including state aid, the MCAS, early childhood, and the career technical education, that $1.8 million represents 27% of the total of those distributions to school districts. Turning to page 4, we can't have a discussion about the MCATs without bringing up the Chicago Educational Service Block Grants. That is statute that requires a distribution to Chicago from the appropriations for MCATs based upon fiscal year 95 percentages of the appropriation at that time. And the programs that are included that are listed on page 4. And out of that $1.7 billion that's distributed, 27% of that total does go to the city of Chicago, working with that. I could take a real quick view and talk about the exact line items and tell you how those funds are distributed as we go forth. So the special ed personnel reimbursement, this is a funding line item that provides reimbursements to local education agencies for a portion of the salary costs for certified and non-certified staff who work with students with disabilities. The formula simplified is basically $9,000 for a full-time, fully certified teacher, or $3,500 for a full-time, non-certified employee who has works in providing services to special ed students. The block grant percentage on this particular line item is at 19.1%, and then the balance is distributed throughout the state. The funding for children requiring special ed services, this is a general reimbursement to school districts for providing services to special ed students. The funding formula is as simple as after the block grant percentage of 29.2% that's distributed to Chicago, the remainder is distributed to school districts based upon an 85 to 15% split. 85% is distributed on an average daily attendance, an amount per pupil to every school district, and then 15% of the proration is distributed based upon the DHS count that's utilized in the general state aid claim. And it's the same amount of funding for every district. Special ed orphanage, I said earlier that, primarily these line items are reimbursement for prior year expenditures. The special ed education orphanage reimbursement is an exception to that. That is a current year funding, and this provides reimbursement for the education cost and transportation cost of a student who is placed in a school district who resides in a foster family home or a state-owned facility. These students are reimbursed at 100% always, and in the event of an insufficient appropriate in a given year, this particular line item, we have the Section 23 exception where we can borrow from a future year appropriation to ensure that school districts are reimbursed at 100%. Again, Chicago receives approximately 38.8% of that appropriation. There's the special education private facility tuition. This is a reimbursement to school districts to provide funding. Any dollar above 2 times a school district's per capita tuition charge is given to a school district with no cap, and this is to provide reimbursement for tuition paid by school districts for placements of special ed students in private residential facilities, working with that. Chicago's block grant percentage of this is 48.4%. The special ed summer school reimbursement, it's essentially a reimbursement to school districts who provide summer school sessions for students with disabilities as a direct result of the IEP, and we take a summer school ADA, weight it times 0.25, and then distribute funding to the school district based upon that particular school district's general state aid on a per pupil basis. 11.7 million PROP, where 54.4% is distributed via the block grant to Chicago. The special education transportation reimbursement, this is a line item that provides reimbursements to school districts and special ed cooperatives for providing transportation as a result of IEPs for students in special ed. The formula is very simply eligible costs times 80%, and that is the amount that's reimbursed to those school districts for those funding, working with that. The regular vocational transportation reimbursement, this is reimbursement to school districts to provide regular and vocational transportation. The regular transportation, eligible reimbursements for students who reside 1.5 miles from their attendance center and or their walk or commute to school has been deemed a vehicular hazard based upon a formula that's ran through the Illinois Department of Transportation. This is the one MCAT on the regular that does have a measure of local wealth and an offset. We do take the real adjusted EAV from the general state aid claim and multiply that times an assumed rate in statute, and it's by district type. And whatever the eligible costs are for reimbursement, we would subtract the local effort and then distribute funding based upon that. Additionally, in the regular transportation for districts that have extremes amount of local wealth, there is a flag provision in the regular transportation where there is a $16 payment for every eligible student who is transported by the district. Vocational transportation has the same formula for reimbursement. It is eligible cost times 80%, and then the state reimbursement makes up that difference. The Illinois Free Lunch and Breakfast Program. This is funding to provide reimbursement for services of lunch and breakfast in our attendance centers throughout the state. We have a 15-cent reimbursement times the number of eligible meals that have been served by a district. The regular education orphanage tuition line item, this is similar to the special ed orphanage reimbursement in that it is a current year reimbursement to school districts, and it's intended to provide 100% reimbursement to a school district for students residing in a state-owned housing and or county detention centers. The reimbursement is the eligible average daily attendance of those students times 1.2 of the district's per capita tuition charge. And just like the special ed orphanage, we do have the Section 23 exception to allow us to borrow from a future year appropriation. And then the last program that I'm going to talk about the formula is the bilingual education reimbursement. This is reimbursements to school districts, again, current year funded, to provide services for those students who need for the English learners, and ensure there's a reimbursement for that. The formula reimburses a dollar amount based upon the number of students and the amount of time and intensity of services that those students are receiving. And there's also different amounts of that distribution based upon grade level. This is the only line item that I've talked about that does not, Chicago does not have a block grant out of the bilingual line item.